Eleanor Vance, hoping to conquer the blank page taunting her latest novel, sought refuge in the kind of profound quiet only true isolation could offer. She found it, or so she thought, in a remote cabin nestled deep within acres of imposing, ancient woods. The silence was a balm initially, a stark contrast to the city's roar. But the woods held their own secrets. As days bled into nights, the silence grew watchful, and Ellie's sanctuary began to feel like a stage, observed by an unnerving, silent spectator lurking just beyond the tree line, a presence that threatened to unravel not just her story, but her sanity. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The final miles were a teeth-rattling symphony of gravel and potholes, the rental car groaning in protest. Each turn took Ellie Vance deeper into the embrace of the Appalachian foothills, the canopy overhead thickening, swallowing the late afternoon sun. Cell service had vanished an hour ago, a digital severing that felt both liberating and vaguely unnerving. When she finally pulled into the small clearing, the cabin looked exactly like the pictures: small, weathered timber, a curl of smoke already rising from the stone chimney, promising warmth against the encroaching autumn chill. But it was the woods that dominated. They pressed in on all sides of the modest clearing, a solid, unyielding wall of oak, maple, and something darker, pine perhaps, rising like ancient ramparts. They felt impossibly tall, their upper reaches lost in shadow even now, before dusk truly settled. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth, decaying leaves, and wood smoke. And it was quiet. Utterly, profoundly quiet. The kind of quiet that hummed in your ears after the engine died, a silence so deep it felt like a physical presence. Perfect, Ellie breathed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. This was what she needed. No sirens, no demanding emails, no sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful friends asking about her block. Just her laptop, and the quiet majesty of nature. She retrieved her bags, the crunch of her boots on the fallen leaves the only sound. The key was under the mat, as promised. Inside, the cabin was rustic but clean, a main room with a comfortable-looking armchair angled towards a stone fireplace, a small kitchenette, a sturdy wooden table perfect for writing, and a sleeping loft accessible by a narrow ladder. She claimed the table immediately, setting up her laptop, notebooks, and pens, the ritual familiar and grounding. Looking out the small window above the desk, she saw only the dense tangle of the woods. Relief washed over her, potent and cleansing. The first few days fell into a peaceful rhythm. Mornings were spent writing, fueled by strong coffee and the sheer novelty of uninterrupted focus. Words flowed, perhaps not brilliantly yet, but they flowed. Afternoons, she'd take short walks, careful not to stray too far from the clearing's edge. The woods were beautiful, undeniably, with shafts of golden light piercing the canopy and the forest floor a rich tapestry of fallen leaves. Yet, something felt off. It was the silence again, but different now that she was listening more closely. There were fewer bird calls than she'd expect, fewer squirrels chattering or unseen things rustling in the undergrowth. It wasn't dead silent, but it was muted, subdued, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. On the third day, a beat-up pickup truck rumbled into the clearing. An old man, weathered and lean, emerged. Mr. Silas, the caretaker, presumably. He nodded curtly, avoiding eye contact as he began unloading firewood onto the porch rack. Ellie ventured out, offering a hesitant greeting. "Just bringing the wood," he mumbled, his voice raspy, barely disturbing the quiet. He didn't stop working. "Thanks, Mr. Silas," Ellie said, feeling awkward. "It's beautiful out here. So peaceful." He paused, straightening slightly, and glanced towards the tree line, his gaze lingering for a moment. Woods keep to themselves mostly." He hefted another log. "Quiet place." He paused again, then added, almost as an afterthought, without looking at her, "Watchful, though. Always watchful." He finished stacking the wood, gave another noncommittal nod, and drove off, leaving Ellie with a faint prickle of unease. Watchful? An odd choice of words. She chalked it up to the quirky nature of mountain folk, the kind of slightly ominous pronouncement city dwellers romanticized or dismissed. That evening, as dusk began to bleed purple and gray into the sky, she was washing dishes, gazing absently out the window over the sink. The window faced the eastern edge of the clearing. The trees there stood stark against the fading light, their branches like intricate black lace. Suddenly, the hair on the back of her neck prickled. An intense, undeniable sensation of being watched washed over her. Her hands froze in the soapy water. She scanned the tree line slowly, deliberately, searching the deepening shadows between the trunks. Nothing. Just trees, bark textured and gray in the gloom, the dense underbrush a mass of indistinct shapes. A deer, maybe? A trick of the light? Her heart was thudding against her ribs, a sudden, unwelcome intrusion into the calm she'd cultivated. Get a grip, Ellie, she muttered, forcing herself to turn away, back to the mundane task of washing dishes. It was the isolation, the silence getting to her. Mr. Silas's strange comment echoing in her mind. Nothing more. She dried her hands, drew the simple gingham curtains firmly shut, and tried to ignore the feeling that unseen eyes were still fixed on the little cabin, observing her from the silent, waiting woods. The optimism of her arrival felt a little thinner now, a little more fragile. The uneasy feeling lingered, a low hum beneath the surface of the following days. Ellie tried to push it away, burying herself in her writing, forcing herself to appreciate the solitude she'd craved. She avoided looking too long at the tree line, especially during those transitional hours, dawn and dusk, when the light played tricks and the world felt suspended between states. She kept the curtains drawn more often than not after sunset, the cozy lamplight pushing back against the vast darkness outside. It happened 4 days after Mr. Silas's visit. Dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky in fragile hues of pink and pale orange. Ellie, unable to sleep properly, had come downstairs for coffee. She stood by the window near her writing table, sipping the hot liquid, watching the mist curl and dissipate over the dew-kissed grass of the clearing. Her gaze drifted, inevitably, towards the woods. And then she saw it. Not a trick of the light. Not an animal. Not a strangely shaped tree. Standing just inside the shadow line, where the clearing met the dense forest, was a figure. Tall. Impossibly, unnaturally tall and slender. It was stark white, or perhaps a pale, bleached gray, the color of birch bark stripped bare or old bone left too long in the sun. It stood perfectly, utterly still, blending almost seamlessly with the taller, paler tree trunks behind it, yet distinct in its unnatural verticality and lack of branching limbs. It was too far away to make out features, if it even had any. It seemed impossibly thin, elongated. It wasn't wearing clothes, not in any conventional sense, its pale surface seemed unbroken. It just stood there. Motionless. Observing the cabin. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Her coffee mug slipped, clattering against the wooden table, spilling a dark pool. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Primal fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She couldn't look away. It felt wrong, profoundly wrong. Its stillness was absolute, not the stillness of patience, but the stillness of something that didn't need to move, something that existed outside the normal flow of life and time. Her hand fumbled for her phone on the table beside her laptop. A picture. I need proof. I need to show someone. Her fingers trembled as she swiped the screen awake, trying to activate the camera app. It took only a second, maybe 2. She lifted the phone, her eyes darting back to the spot where the figure had stood. It was gone. Vanished. As if it had simply dissolved into the trees or been swallowed by the morning shadows. The space where it had stood was now just trees. Ordinary trees, their bark textured, their branches reaching. There was no sign anything had been there at all. Ellie rushed to the window, pressing her face close to the cool glass, scanning the tree line frantically. Nothing. Had she imagined it? The spilled coffee, the frantic pounding of her heart argued otherwise. But the scene outside was stubbornly normal, the woods silent and impassive. She spent the next hour in a state of agitated confusion. She pulled on boots and a jacket, venturing cautiously out into the damp morning air. She walked to the edge of the clearing, near the spot where she thought she'd seen it. Were those birch trees? Yes, but none looked quite right, none had that stark, featureless quality, that unnatural height. Was it a dead tree trunk, bleached by the sun? She searched, but found nothing that matched the distinct, slender form she'd witnessed. Pareidolia. That had to be it. Her mind, starved for human contact and perhaps stressed by the writing pressure, was creating patterns, seeing figures where there were none. The isolation, the strange quiet, Mr. Silas's unsettling comment, it was all feeding into some waking nightmare. She had to be rational. She was a writer, an observer of the human condition, not some character in a low-budget horror film. She forced herself back inside, cleaned up the spilled coffee, and tried to work. But the image was burned into her mind, the pale, still figure at the edge of her vision, watching. The words wouldn't come. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Later that day, her phone miraculously found a single bar of service, weak and intermittent. David called. His voice, crackling and distant, was an anchor to the normal world. "Hey, Elle. How's the hermit life treating you? Finally writing that masterpiece? Hey, David, she said, trying to keep her voice light, casual. It's quiet. Really quiet. Good for the focus, right? No distractions? Yeah, she hesitated. Mostly. It's just really isolated out here. The woods are pretty intense. Intense how? His voice sharpened slightly with concern. Oh, she forced a laugh. Just big and dark. Saw something weird this morning, probably just a deer acting strange near the tree line, or an odd shadow. Gave me a jump. She deliberately downplayed it, terrified of sounding unhinged. The line crackled, "K. Well, don't let your imagination run wild out there, okay? All that silence can play tricks on you. Call me if you need anything, service permitting." I will. I'm fine, really. Just adjusting. The call dropped. Ellie stood there, phone silent in her hand, feeling more isolated than ever. David's skepticism, though well-intentioned, only reinforced her own desperate attempts at rationalization. But deep down, a cold knot of fear tightened. What she had seen hadn't felt like imagination. It had felt real. And it had been watching her. Rationalization proved a flimsy shield against the persistent unease. 2 evenings after the first distinct sighting, as twilight painted the clearing in shades of bruised purple and deep gray, Ellie found herself drawn to the window again, almost against her will. She scanned the tree line, heart already beginning a nervous rhythm against her ribs. And there it was. Same spot, or very near it. Same unnatural height and slenderness. Same stark, bone-like paleness against the darkening woods. Same absolute, unnerving stillness. The silent watcher, she thought, the name forming unbidden in her mind. It wasn't closer, not perceptibly. It made no move, no sound. It simply stood, an undeniable presence at the periphery. Fear warred with a strange, morbid fascination. She forced herself to look away, counted to 10, looked back. Still there. She grabbed her phone, camera app already open this time. She raised it, trying to zoom in, her hands shaking. As she tapped the screen to focus, the image wavered. She snapped a picture anyway. Looked back up. Gone. She immediately checked the photo. It showed nothing but the darkening trees, slightly blurred from her unsteady hand. There was a pale patch that might have been a birch trunk catching the last light, or maybe just lens flare. It was ambiguous, useless. Proof of nothing but her own shaky nerves. This became the pattern. The figure, the still man, the birch watcher, her mind cycled through names, trying to categorize, to understand, would appear. Always at dawn or dusk, sometimes during moments of heavy fog that rolled in from the woods, clinging to the clearing. Always in roughly the same section of the tree line. Always motionless. Always vanishing the second she tried to definitively document it or looked away for more than a heartbeat. Her attempts became almost frantic. She tried setting up her phone on a makeshift tripod by the window, hoping to catch it on video. It wouldn't appear when the camera was rolling. She tried sketching it quickly from memory, but the image felt slippery, indistinct, long, pale, still, but the exact proportions, the texture, the feeling of it, refused to be pinned down on paper. The lack of concrete proof was maddening. It fed a growing suspicion that maybe David was right, maybe the isolation was getting to her. Was she hallucinating this silent sentinel? Her writing ground to a halt. How could she focus on fictional horrors when a real, inexplicable one potentially stood just yards away? Her days became consumed by observation. She'd sit at her writing table, laptop open but ignored, eyes constantly scanning the edge of the woods. Sleep offered little respite, filled with fragmented dreams of wandering lost among endless pale, silent trees, or waking with a jolt, convinced a tall, featureless face was peering through the loft window. She started noticing other small things, details she might have previously dismissed. The patch of woods where the figure usually stood seemed quieter. Even the subdued sounds of the forest seemed to avoid that specific area. Walking the perimeter of the clearing one crisp afternoon, she noticed a patch of ground near that section where the morning frost seemed to linger unnaturally long, sparkling white even when the sun had melted it elsewhere. And there was one particular tall maple, standing near the figure's favored zone, whose leaves on the side facing the clearing seemed slightly off. Not diseased, exactly, but paler, less vibrant than the rest of the tree, as if subtly leached of color. These details were minor, easily deniable. Frost lingered in shady spots. Leaves changed color unevenly all the time. Animals had their own territories and paths. She could explain it all away, piece by piece. But taken together, combined with the recurring sightings, they painted a picture that felt increasingly coherent and deeply disturbing. The figure never threatened. It never moved closer. It never made a sound. It simply watched. And its silent, unwavering observation was becoming a psychological weight, pressing down on her, warping the peaceful solitude she had sought into a state of constant, low-level dread. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a glass box, leaving her exposed and vulnerable to that silent, pale gaze from the edge of the ancient woods. She was trapped not by walls, but by an invisible line of sight, and the growing fear that she was the only one who could see the watcher. The transformation was insidious. Ellie, who had come seeking focus, now found her thoughts perpetually snagged on the tree line. Her novel lay dormant, the cursor blinking accusingly on a half-finished sentence for days. The quiet she had craved now felt predatory, amplifying every floorboard creak, every skittering leaf outside, translating them into potential movements from the woods. Sleep deprivation gnawed at her edges. When she did sleep, the dreams intensified. Sometimes she was running through an endless forest of smooth, white trunks that resembled limbs, the ground soft and yielding like flesh. Other times, she dreamt she was inside the cabin, safe, only to feel a cold presence and turn to see the pale figure standing inside the room, silent, watching her sleep. She'd wake with a gasp, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat, the image lingering long after she confirmed she was alone in the loft. The feeling of being watched became pervasive, constant. It no longer mattered if she could actually see the figure. Even with the curtains drawn tight, sitting with her back to the windows, she felt it, a pressure, a focused attention directed at the cabin, specifically at her. It felt strongest on the side of the house facing the figure's usual haunt, like an invisible beam trained on the thin wooden walls. The isolation was no longer liberating, it was a vulnerability, emphasizing her utter separation from help or corroboration. Driven by a mixture of fear and desperation for answers, she sought out Mr. Silas again. She flagged him down on the narrow gravel road leading away from the property cluster as he was leaving in his truck. He pulled over reluctantly, engine idling, regarding her with his usual impassive expression. "Mr. Silas," Ellie began, trying to sound calm, inquisitive, not panicked. "I was wondering. Are there any local stories about these woods? Anything unusual?" He chewed on something, tobacco, maybe, his gaze drifting towards the dense trees lining the road. "Woods are woods," he said noncommittally. "Right, but I mean," Ellie persisted, leaning slightly towards his open window, "have people ever reported seeing things? Or feeling watched? Especially near the clearing where my cabin is?" Silas spat onto the gravel. His eyes, surprisingly sharp and blue, flickered towards her, then away again, deliberately avoiding looking towards her cabin's general direction. "Some places. Folks best leave alone. That clearing." He hesitated, seeming to weigh his words. "Heard stories. Years back. People getting turned around, lost. Said the woods played tricks on your eyes if you stare too long." "Tricks? Or is there something in the woods?" Ellie pressed, her voice barely a whisper. He finally met her gaze, his expression hard, unreadable. "There's things in any deep woods best not to trouble, miss. Something watches you if you watch it too long. Best advice I can give? Mind your own business. Stay inside after dark. Don't go looking for things you ain't prepared to find." His eyes deliberately slid away from the spot she knew she meant. He wouldn't look there. The refusal felt heavy, significant. "Did anyone live in the cabin before me? Recently? Renters come and go," he said dismissively, putting the truck in gear. "Some don't stay the full term." He gave a curt nod, a clear dismissal, and pulled away, leaving Ellie standing in the dust, his cryptic warnings echoing in the oppressive silence. Something watches you if you watch it too long. The interaction only amplified her anxiety. He hadn't denied anything, hadn't called her crazy. He'd warned her. That night, Ellie decided to try an experiment. She would actively ignore the tree line. All day, she kept the curtains facing that side of the woods drawn. She focused on chores, tried reading a book, even attempted writing again, forcing her eyes away from the windows. She refused to acknowledge the watcher, refused to give it her attention. As dusk fell, the cabin felt unusually cold. The feeling of being watched intensified to an almost unbearable degree. It wasn't just a vague sensation anymore, it felt like a physical pressure against the cabin walls, a silent, insistent demand for her attention. It was as if her deliberate ignorance was an offense, provoking the figure, making it focus harder. The air in the cabin grew thick, heavy. Fear coiled tightly in her stomach. Ignoring it didn't make it go away. It seemed only to draw it closer, metaphorically tightening its invisible tether to her consciousness. She finally broke, yanking back the curtain, eyes desperately scanning the twilight gloom. The tree line was empty. But the feeling lingered, stronger than ever, a chilling testament to the connection, unwanted, terrifying, that had formed between her and the silent entity in the woods. The pale figure remained an enigma, its very nature seeming to shift with Ellie's perception, or perhaps with its own unknowable whim. Each time she saw it, glimpses snatched at dawn, dusk, or through swirling fog, it seemed subtly different, yet fundamentally the same. Always tall, pale, and utterly still. But were its limbs longer this time? Was its torso thinner, more elongated? Was that a slight, almost imperceptible tilt to where a head should be? Once, in the eerie half-light of a foggy morning, she thought she saw faint depressions, darker patches on the smooth, pale surface where eyes might be. But the moment she tried to focus, to confirm the detail, the fog swirled, or her eyes watered, and the impression dissolved. The lack of distinct features became more terrifying than any monstrous visage could have been. It was a canvas onto which her fear could project anything, its featurelessness a void that reflected her own growing internal chaos. Was it evolving? Or was her mind, strained by fear and isolation, desperately trying to impose familiar shapes onto the fundamentally alien? The uncertainty was a torment. Frustrated by her inability to capture photographic proof, Ellie turned her obsessive energy towards research. She spent hours hunched over her laptop whenever the satellite internet connection sporadically flickered to life, diving down rabbit holes of local history and folklore. She searched for town records, old newspaper archives digitized online, anything related to the specific area, the specific plot of land her cabin occupied. Keywords flew from her fingertips: pale figure woods appellation, missing persons, county name, local legends forest entity, cabin clearing strange occurrences. The results were fragmented, unsatisfying. She found scattered mentions of old folktales, dismissed by historians as superstition, tales of wood-haints or hunger spirits that lured people off the path, tales of places where the woods felt wrong or watched. There were a few missing persons reports from the region over the decades, but none definitively linked to the immediate vicinity, and certainly none mentioning a tall, pale figure. Then she found it, a brief mention in an old, digitized community newsletter from the 1970s. It spoke of a family who had rented the old Silas place, presumably the cluster of properties including her cabin, and left abruptly mid-lease, citing persistent feelings of unease and trouble sleeping. No further details. It wasn't much, but it was something. A whisper from the past suggesting she wasn't the first to feel the wrongness of this place. Had they seen it too? Her calls with David became increasingly fraught. The weak signal only amplified the sense of desperation. "Ellie, you sound frantic," David said during one particularly choppy call, his voice tight with worry. "Are you sure you're okay out there?" "I'm telling you, David, it's real," Ellie insisted, her voice rising. "This thing. It stands there, by the trees. So pale, like bone. And it just watches." She tried to describe the shifting indistinctness, the oppressive feeling, the marker Silas's cryptic warnings. Okay, slow down," David said, his tone attempting calm but betraying his fear for her. "I looked online, Ellie. Based on what you said. Pale humanoid, woods. There are tons of generic cryptid stories, Slender Man stuff, whatever. None of it quite matches, and honestly, most of it sounds like internet creepypasta. This isn't creepypasta, David. This is happening." Ellie, his voice was gentle now, but laced with a fear she recognized, the fear that she was losing her grip. Maybe this retreat wasn't such a good idea. All this solitude. Maybe you should come back? Or I could drive out there? And what? You think you won't see it? Or you think I'm crazy?" The accusation hung heavy in the static-filled silence. "I think you're isolated and scared, Elle. And I'm worried about you. Driving might be difficult if you're this stressed." He was torn, she could hear it. Torn between wanting her safe and fearing she was already too far gone, psychologically speaking, to even manage the drive home. The call dropped again, leaving Ellie shaking, clutching the phone like a useless talisman. David's inability to find anything matching the figure made it feel even more personal, more targeted. His concern for her sanity mirrored her own deepest fears. Was the figure real, an external horror? Or was it a manifestation of her own unraveling mind, the isolation finally cracking her psyche? The indistinctness of the watcher blurred the line between the two possibilities, leaving her trapped in a terrifying ambiguity. She looked towards the window, towards the silent, waiting woods, and wondered if the greatest horror wasn't the figure itself, but the dawning realization that she might never know for sure what was real. The fragile boundary between watcher and watched, between the woods and the clearing, was crossed not with a sudden rush, but with a quiet, deliberate placement. One cold, clear morning, Ellie stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, intending to force herself to sit outside, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. Her gaze, as always, swept the tree line. The figure wasn't visible in the bright morning sun. But something else was. There, lying just a few yards inside the clearing, maybe 10 feet from the edge of the dense trees where the figure most often stood, was something undeniably out of place. It was a single stone, perfectly smooth, oval-shaped, and a pale, milky white, like polished quartz but somehow duller, lacking any reflective quality. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of her palm, but it stood out starkly against the frost-brown grass and fallen leaves. She knew instinctively it wasn't native to the clearing. The other stones scattered around were rougher, darker, typical Appalachian rock. This stone felt placed, deliberate. It lay directly in line with the figure's usual vantage point, a silent marker dropped just inside her space. It felt like a statement, a subtle trespass, a quiet shifting of the unspoken rules. A wave of nausea washed over her. Hesitantly, she walked towards it, each step feeling heavy, reluctant. As she drew closer, the air around the stone seemed colder, heavier. The background hum of the woods, the distant caw of a crow, the rustle of wind high in the branches, seemed to fade, creating a pocket of intense, unnerving silence centered on the pale object. She felt dizzy, the familiar sensation of being watched intensifying dramatically, even though she could see nothing among the trees. It was as if the figure's presence was now anchored to this spot, its gaze focused through this simple, smooth stone. Her hand trembled as she reached down. The stone was cold, unnaturally so, colder than the morning air warranted. Its surface was smooth, almost slick, like water-worn bone. Touching it sent a jolt, not electric, but a deep, resonant wrongness, up her arm. It felt ancient, alien. She snatched her hand back as if burned. Panic warred with a strange compulsion. Leaving it there felt like acquiescence, like accepting this intrusion. But touching it felt like interacting with something utterly other, something she shouldn't engage with. With trembling fingers, heart hammering, she forced herself to pick it up. It felt heavy in her palm, dense. She wanted to throw it, smash it, but instead, acting on pure instinct, she carried it back to the cabin, her steps quickening into a near run. Inside, she dropped it onto the wooden table, where it landed with a dull thud. She stared at it, breathing heavily. What did it mean? A gift? A warning? A claim? She spent the rest of the day feeling jittery, violated. The stone sat on the table, a pale accusation. She couldn't bring herself to touch it again, nor could she bring herself to throw it back outside. It felt like a piece of the figure, or its influence, had now physically entered her sanctuary. That evening, as dusk crept in, she forced herself to look out the window towards the usual spot. The figure was there. But it seemed different. Had it moved? She stared, trying to discern its exact position relative to the trees she used as markers. It appeared to be standing slightly further back, deeper within the shadows of the tree line, almost hesitant. As if her removal of the stone had been acknowledged, resulting in a subtle retreat, a chastened step back. Or was that wishful thinking? The alternative interpretation chilled her even more. Perhaps removing the stone hadn't chastened it at all. Perhaps it was merely regrouping, shifting its tactics. The slight withdrawal could be a feint, a pause before the next, perhaps less subtle, escalation. The pale stone on her table felt less like a trophy of defiance and more like a captured piece in a game whose rules she couldn't comprehend, played against an opponent whose motives remained terrifyingly obscure. The trespass had occurred, the boundary breached, and the silence from the woods now felt charged with an even greater, more patient, intensity. The days following the discovery of the pale stone were thick with tension. Ellie felt stretched thin, her nerves frayed raw. Every shadow seemed longer, every patch of silence deeper. The figure's appearances became slightly less predictable. Sometimes it was further back, as she'd first perceived, other times it seemed to revert to its original position right at the edge, its stillness an unnerving constant in the face of her turmoil. The stone remained on her table, a cold, silent weight in the room, mirroring the weight in her chest. Then came the night of the full moon. The woods were bathed in an ethereal, silvery light that paradoxically seemed to deepen the shadows, making the familiar clearing look alien, otherworldly. Ellie found herself by the window, drawn by an almost magnetic pull, unable to resist looking. And there it was. Clearer than ever before. The moonlight seemed to cling to its pale form, outlining it starkly against the blackness of the forest behind it. It stood right at the absolute edge of the clearing, no longer partially obscured by foreground trees or deep shadow. Its height seemed immense, its slenderness unnatural, a stark white column against the textured bark of the surrounding oaks. The indistinctness remained, no clear face, no features she could definitively name, but its presence felt overwhelming, undeniable. Ellie's breath hitched. She stood frozen, mesmerized by fear and a dreadful anticipation. Time seemed to slow. The only sound was the frantic drumming of her own heart. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure moved. It raised one long, impossibly thin, pale arm. The movement was fluid, yet unnatural, like a branch bending in a non-existent wind. The arm extended outwards, towards her, palm seemingly open, though details remained maddeningly obscure. It wasn't a threatening gesture, not a fist, not a clawing hand. It was ambiguous. A beckoning? An offering? A simple indication towards the impenetrable depths of the woods that lay behind it? The gesture hung in the air, held with that same profound stillness that characterized the figure's entire being. Utterly silent. No sound accompanied the movement, no whisper on the wind, no cracking twig. Just the visual, the pale arm extended in the moonlight, pointing from the watcher towards the dark unknown. A silent ultimatum. A terrifying, unvoiced question. Ellie's mind raced, panic and a strange, morbid curiosity warring within her. What did it want? What did the gesture mean? Her choices flashed before her, stark and terrifying. Flee, slam the curtains shut, barricade the door, wedge chairs under the handles. Huddle in the darkest corner, phone clutched uselessly, praying for dawn or rescue, trapped in agonizing terror. Confront, fling open the window, scream into the night, curse it, demand what it wanted. Shine the powerful flashlight she kept by the door directly at it, hoping to make it flinch, react, reveal something. Ignore, force herself to turn away, Kalban her back on the impossible sight. Close the curtains calmly. Go upstairs. Pretend it wasn't there, hadn't gestured, didn't exist. Gamble that disengagement was the only safe path, despite the intense pressure she knew would follow. Approach, the most terrifying thought. Driven by sheer terror that had tipped over into something else, some primal need to understand or appease, take one step, then another, out the door, across the moonlit clearing, towards the silent, waiting figure and its silent invitation into the black woods. Her hand hovered over the curtain pull. Her eyes darted to the heavy flashlight on the floor. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, yet also strangely light, as if ready to bolt in any direction. She chose confrontation, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and defiance. Snatching the flashlight, she wrenched open the cabin door, the sudden noise echoing in the stillness. She aimed the beam directly at the figure, thumbing the switch to its highest setting. "What do you want?" she yelled, her voice surprisingly steady, though thin in the vast quiet. "Leave me alone." The beam hit the figure. It didn't flinch. It didn't recoil. But its form seemed to shimmer? Distort subtly in the harsh, artificial light, its edges momentarily blurring, its paleness seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. For a heart-stopping second, she thought she saw the faint outline of skeletal fingers on the gesturing hand. Then, as slowly and deliberately as it had raised its arm, the figure lowered it. It didn't fade instantly this time. It simply retracted the silent invitation. And then, without turning, without a sound, it seemed to recede, melting back into the deeper shadows between the trees until it was indistinguishable from them, vanishing completely from sight. Ellie stood trembling in the open doorway, the flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the empty space where the figure had stood. The woods were silent once more. The invitation had been withdrawn, but the question it posed lingered, heavy and chilling, in the cold, moonlit air. She hadn't fled, hadn't approached, but she hadn't gotten an answer either. Only a deeper sense of the abyss she was teetering on the edge of. Dawn broke gray and indifferent, the vibrant promise of the previous mornings replaced by a flat, exhausted light. Ellie hadn't slept. She'd spent the night huddled in the armchair, flashlight in her lap, eyes fixed on the windows until the first hint of morning bled through the trees. The figure did not reappear. The clearing felt different now. Not peaceful, not even menacingly silent. It felt empty, profoundly so, but tainted, like a room where something terrible has happened, leaving an invisible residue. The silence she had once craved now seemed hollow, echoing with the unasked questions and the memory of that silent, beckoning arm. There was no question of staying. Her writing retreat was over, aborted by a horror far more compelling and paralyzing than any blank page. She packed with frantic efficiency, throwing clothes haphazardly into her bags, dumping notebooks and pens into a box. She didn't bother cleaning, didn't straighten the bedclothes. She just needed to leave. Every glance towards the tree line sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through her, even though she knew, somehow, that the figure wouldn't show itself in the broad daylight. Its time was the threshold, the in-between moments. She left the pale stone sitting on the table. A silent offering, perhaps, or simply something she couldn't bear to touch again, couldn't bear to take with her. Let it remain in the place where it belonged, or where it had been sent. Loading the car, the familiar crunch of leaves underfoot felt jarringly normal. The air was cold, biting. As she slammed the trunk shut, she saw Mr. Silas's pickup truck approaching slowly down the gravel track. He pulled up near her car, idling, watching her. Ellie braced herself, expecting questions, or perhaps more cryptic warnings. But he just looked at her, his weathered face impassive, his sharp blue eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been understanding, or perhaps just weary recognition. "Leaving?" he asked, his voice the usual low rasp. "Yes," Ellie said, her voice tight. It wasn't working out." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting past her towards the cabin, then to the edge of the woods where she'd seen the figure. He didn't comment on her abrupt departure, didn't ask about the remaining rental term. He simply nodded again, a final, knowing gesture that offered no comfort, no explanation, only confirmation that there were things in these woods best left undisturbed. He put his truck in gear and drove on towards the other properties, leaving her alone one last time in the tainted clearing. The drive back felt surreal. The woods pressing close to the road seemed darker, more watchful than before. Every tall, pale tree trunk glimpsed through the window made her heart leap into her throat. When she finally hit paved roads, saw other cars, felt the weak bars of cell service return, the relief was immense, but incomplete. Months later, Ellie was back in the city, navigating the familiar cacophony. She was trying to write again, trying to piece her life back together, but the experience had left its mark. A lingering anxiety hummed beneath the surface. She avoided parks after dusk, felt uneasy near dense stands of trees, slept with the lights on more often than she cared to admit. The profound silence she once sought now felt threatening. One late afternoon, forcing herself to face her lingering unease, she walked through a large city park as dusk began to settle. People walked dogs, joggers puffed past, the sounds of traffic a distant hum. She found herself near a less frequented area, where a path skirted a dense thicket of overgrown bushes and older trees. Her gaze was drawn, unwillingly, towards the shadows pooling beneath the branches. For a single, heart-stopping moment, she saw it. Or thought she did. Just inside the shadows, standing perfectly still amongst the tangled growth, a tall, unnaturally pale shape. Slender, motionless. A car's headlights swept across the path from a nearby street, making her blink. She looked again, eyes wide, heart pounding. There was nothing there. Just trees, shadows, and the dying light. Was it real? A hallucination triggered by the familiar setting of trees at dusk? Or had the watcher, the silent man from the edge of the woods, imprinted itself onto her perception forever, destined to linger at the periphery of her vision, a constant, pale reminder of the silent invitation and the ancient, watchful woods she had dared to disturb? She couldn't be sure. And that uncertainty, perhaps, was the most chilling legacy of all. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.